The best man cleared his throat, lifted the wedding program in his hand, and read the names of the people being honored that afternoon. He read my husband's name. He read the names of both his parents. He read the name of the maid of honor, the groomsman, the flower girl, the woman who had played the piano during the processional. And then he stopped, because the next name on the program, the one that should have come after my husband's, the name of the bride, was not there. It had been erased, not misspelled, not abbreviated, erased. Where my name should have been printed in soft gray italics, there was a clean white space the size of a thumbprint, as if someone had decided, very carefully, that the bride at her own wedding did not require identification. I was standing 6 feet from him in a dress I had paid for myself, holding a bouquet of white ranunculus that my mother-in-law had told 3 different people she had picked out. And I watched the best man's eyes move down that page and lift slowly back up to mine. He knew. He had known the moment he opened the program backstage. He had been holding that piece of paper for 90 minutes trying to decide what to do, and in front of 240 guests he made his decision. He folded the program in half. He set it down on the small wooden table beside the unity candle. He looked at my husband, and then he looked at me, and he said into the microphone, in a voice that did not shake, "I'd like to add a name they forgot. The bride. Her name is Wren." The room did not gasp. That is not how it happened. The room went so quiet I could hear the hum of the ceiling fan 3 rooms away. I could hear my mother-in-law inhale through her nose, the way she did when a waiter brought the wrong wine. I could hear my husband's father shift his weight in the second row. And I could hear, behind me, the sound of my own grandmother's youngest sister, Ruth, who was 80 years old and had flown in from Charleston with a cane and a hat box, set down her purse on the pew in a way that meant she had heard everything and was no longer going to pretend she hadn't. That was the moment my marriage actually began, not the kiss, not the vows, that moment. The moment a man I had met 3 times in my life refused to participate in the small, polite, beautifully laminated cruelty my husband's family had spent 6 months building. And what I did next, they didn't expect it. My name is Wren. I was 34 years old the day I got married. I am a forensic accountant, which is a polite way of saying I am paid to find the money people are sure they hid well enough that nobody would ever find it. I have spent 12 years of my professional life sitting across conference tables from men in good suits who underestimated me because I am quiet, because I am small, because I do not raise my voice. Because when I ask a question, I ask it the way a librarian asks if you've returned your book. And every single one of them, by the end of the engagement, has understood that the quietest person in the room is usually the one holding the documents. I tell you this not to brag. I tell you this because by the time the best man read my name out loud in that sanctuary in Asheboro, North Carolina, on a Saturday afternoon in October, I had already been keeping my husband's family financially afloat for almost 3 years. And not one of them knew it. Not my mother-in-law, Vivienne, who told the women at her garden club that I was sweet but not from our world. Not my father-in-law, Leonard, who shook my hand at every family dinner the way a man shakes hands with the contractor. Not my husband's older brother, Glenn, who once asked me at Easter, with a mouthful of ham, whether I had ever considered staying home, since accounting is so hard on a woman's nerves. I had loved my husband Reed since the second week of graduate school, when he sat beside me in a statistics seminar and slid a paper cup of coffee across the desk, because he had noticed my hands were cold. He was the kind of man who noticed cold hands. He was also, and this is the part I have only recently been able to say without flinching, the kind of man whose mother had spent 36 years training him to confuse her approval with love. We can come back to that. I am not ready yet. What I will tell you first is this. Vivienne, my mother-in-law, was not a monster. I have to say this clearly because the easy version of this story would be one where she is a cartoon and I am a saint, and that is not what happened. Vivienne, before she decided I was not the right shape of woman for her son, did something for me that I will carry with me until the day I die. My grandmother passed away 2 months after Reed and I got engaged. The morning of the funeral, I went to put on her old camel coat, the one I had taken from her closet because it still smelled like her violet hand cream, and the lining was torn so badly the entire silk back panel had come loose and was dragging on the floor. I sat down on the bedroom carpet and I cried the kind of cry that does not have any sound in it. Vivienne walked in. She looked at the coat. She did not say a word. She drove home, came back 40 minutes later with a sewing basket the size of a microwave, and she sat on my bedroom floor for 4.5 hours in a dove-gray church dress, hand-stitching the lining back into my grandmother's coat 1/4 inch at a time. She did not ask me to thank her. She did not post about it. She did it because in that moment she understood what the coat was, and I loved her for it. For almost 2 years, I loved her the way you love the version of someone they only let you see once. So when I tell you what came next, you have to understand. I was not looking for a villain. I was looking the whole time for the woman who sewed the lining back into my grandmother's coat. I kept thinking if I am patient enough, if I am useful enough, if I am quiet enough, that woman will come back. She did not come back. But I kept looking for her, and that is the part of this story I am most embarrassed about. The exploitation started small, the way it always does. 3 months after the engagement, Vivian asked if I would take a quick look at the books for the family antique store, Holloway and Sons, on Sunset Avenue. Leonard had been running it since 1986. Their accountant of 22 years had retired the previous in spring. They had hired a younger man, charged him $300 a month, and he had been doing what younger men charging $300 a month often do, which is the absolute bare minimum. I spent a Sunday afternoon at their dining room table with a yellow legal pad and a laptop, and by 6 in the evening I had found $17,000 in misclassified inventory write-downs, a sales tax filing that was about to trigger an audit, and a line of credit at First Carolina that was 4 payments behind. I did not charge them. I gave Leonard a one-page memo with 5 action items and told him I was happy to help. Just family helping family. He shook my hand. He said, and I remember this exactly, "Honey, you saved our bacon." Vivian kissed me on the cheek. That was January of the year before the wedding. 6 weeks later, Vivian called me at my office. Not my cell phone, my office. She had gotten the number from Reed. She wanted to know if I could pop by the store on my lunch hour to look at a check that had bounced. By April, I was reconciling their accounts every other Sunday. By June, I had restructured the line of credit, set up a proper payroll system for their 2 part-time employees, and negotiated a vendor settlement with a furniture wholesaler in High Point who had been about to send the matter to collections. The amount I saved them, conservatively, was $41,000 in the first year. The amount they paid me was zero. The amount Vivian thanked me for it, in front of other people, was also zero. In front of her sister Lorraine at the Memorial Day cookout, she said, and I am not making this up, she said, Reed's girlfriend dabbles in finance. Dabbles. I had restructured her business in my unpaid time, and I dabbled. I rationalized it. This is the part where I have to be honest with you, because if I let myself off the hook, you cannot trust anything else I tell you. I rationalized it 3 different ways, and I am going to name them, because there are people listening to this right now who are doing the exact same math in their own heads about their own in-laws, and they need to hear someone say it out loud. The first thing I told myself was that this was how Southern families worked. I had grown up in Greensboro, not in Vivian's world of pearl earrings and the second pew, on the right, at Front Street Methodist, but close enough to know that women like her did not say thank you the way other people said thank you. They said it in pound cake. They said it in a handwritten note 3 weeks later. They said it in remembering your coffee order. I told myself the thank you would come. I told myself I was just early. I was not early, it was never coming. The second thing I told myself was that Reed noticed, even if no one else did, and that was almost true. Reed did notice. He would squeeze my hand under the table at family dinners. He would tell me, in the car on the way home, that his mother was old school, and that she shows love in weird ways. He would tell me he saw me. And I believed him, because he was the man who had slid a coffee across a desk to a stranger with cold hands. And I had built an entire understanding of his character on a paper cup of coffee from 12 years earlier. I did not yet understand that a man can see you clearly and still not say your name in a room where his mother is standing. The third thing I told myself was the worst, and it is the one I want every woman listening to write down on a piece of paper and tape to her bathroom mirror tonight. I told myself I am earning my place. I told myself if I worked hard enough on their books, if I showed up enough Sundays, if I drove Leonard to enough cardiology appointments after his stent, if I let Vivian correct my pronunciation of Pekin Without flinching, eventually they would look at me and say, "She is one of us." I was not earning my place. You cannot earn a place at a table where the people seated have already decided you are the help. The harder I worked, the more help I became. That is a sentence I wish someone had said to me at 26. I am saying it now to whoever needs it. There were warning signs. There are always warning signs. I am going to give you the three biggest ones, the ones I should have seen, because is in my line of work warning signs are called red flags, and I have built an entire career on finding them in other people's businesses, and I missed every single one of them in my own life. That is the joke. That is the cosmic joke of being a forensic accountant who marries into a family of antique dealers. You can read a balance sheet at 50 paces, and you cannot read your own mother-in-law's face from across a kitchen counter. Warning sign number one came at the engagement party. Vivienne had hosted it at the country club, $340 a head, and she had made the seating chart herself. My parents, who had driven up from Greensboro in my father's Buick, were seated at table 11. Table 11 was in the back, against the wall that led to the kitchen, beside a service station where the waitstaff dropped dirty plates. My parents are not loud people. My father is a high school band director. My mother taught kindergarten for 31 years. They sat at table 11 and they smiled and they did not say a word to me about it, because that is the kind of people they are. When I asked Vivienne gently, in the powder room, why my parents were not closer to the head table, she put her hand on my forearm and she said, "Sweetheart, I put them where they'd feel most comfortable. They're not really country club people, are they?" I smiled. I said something about how kind that was of her. I went back to the table and I drank a glass of champagne and I let it slide. That was warning sign number one. 6 months out from the wedding, I let it slide. Warning sign number two came at the bridal shower, which Vivienne also insisted on hosting at her house with her friends on a date that conflicted with my own mother's only available weekend. My mother flew in from a teaching conference and arrived 90 minutes late. By the time she walked in, Vivienne had already opened 3 gifts on my behalf, including one from my own aunt, and had announced to the room that the bride was running a little behind. You know how she is. I had not been running behind. I had been waiting in the car for my mother. Vivienne had told the room I was always running behind. She said it with a smile. She said it the way you say a thing about a niece you find charming, but slightly tragic. My Aunt Ruth, the 81-year-old one from Charleston, the one who had not yet flown up for the wedding, called me that night and said, on the phone, "Honey, that woman is sizing you up like a side table she's about to mark down." I laughed. I told her she was being dramatic. That was warning sign number two, 4 months out. I told my own great aunt she was being dramatic about the woman who would 6 months later erase me from my own wedding program. Warning sign number three came 8 weeks before the wedding. I was at the Intex store on a Sunday working through year-end inventory adjustments, and Glenn, the older brother, came in. Glenn worked at the store part-time, mostly to keep his hands busy between sales jobs that never seemed to last. Glenn and I had a complicated relationship, which is the polite way of saying Glenn did not like me and had never made a secret of it. He walked past the desk where I was working. He looked at my spreadsheet. He looked at me, and he said with a small, dry laugh, "You know, Wren, the quiet ones always keep the receipts. Mama better watch out for you." Then he walked into the back room and started unwrapping a shipment of porcelain. I should have stopped working. I should have closed the laptop. I should have walked into the back room and asked him what he meant. I did not, because I was 33 years old and engaged to be married, and I did not want a confrontation with my future brother-in-law 8 weeks before the wedding. I let it slide. That was warning sign number three. And the thing is, Glenn was not threatening me. Glenn, in his own broken way, was warning me. He had grown up in that house. He knew his mother. He knew what was coming. He was telling me, in the only language he had, that I had better start keeping receipts, because the woman of the house was going to come for me eventually. I did not hear him. I heard a rude comment from a brother-in-law I did not like. I went back to the spreadsheet. The receipts, it turned out, I had been keeping all along, not because Glenn told me to, because that is what forensic accountants do. We keep everything. We keep the dated emails, the signed memos, the loan agreements, the bank statements, the canceled checks. We keep them the way other people keep birthday cards. By the time of the wedding, I had a file on my home computer in a folder I had named, with the gallows humor of my profession, Holloway and Sons Audit Trail. It was 412 documents long. I had not built it to use against anyone. I had built it because I do not know how to not build it. And that file, 8 weeks later, was going to be the difference between a woman who got humiliated at her own wedding and a woman who walked out of that sanctuary holding the deed to her own life. But I am getting ahead of myself. I have to tell you about the wedding. I have to tell you what happened on that Saturday in October, because that is the wound. And you cannot understand the rest of the story unless you understand what it felt like to stand at the altar and watch a man you had met 3 times save you, because the man you were about to marry did not. The wedding was at 3 o'clock in the afternoon at First Methodist on Sunset Avenue, 4 blocks from the antique store. Vivian had chosen the church. Vivian had chosen the florist. Vivian had chosen the caterer, the linens, the string quartet, the calligrapher who did the programs. I had paid for 40% of the wedding. My parents had paid for 30%. Vivian and Leonard had paid for 30%, and Vivian had decided, somewhere along the way, that her 30% entitled her to 100% of the aesthetic decisions, and I had let her have them, because by that point I was tired, and because I had told myself, again, that I was earning my place. The dress was the only thing that was entirely mine. Ivory satin, no lace, a single seam down the back that the seamstress at the bridal shop on Fayetteville Street had hand-stitched, while I stood on a little wooden box and looked at myself in the mirror and thought, I am 34 years old, and I am about to marry a man I love. The rehearsal was the night before. On Friday at 6 in the evening, we did the walk-through in the sanctuary. We did the order of the readings. The wedding coordinator, a woman named Bet, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a clipboard the size of a placemat, walked us through the cues. After the rehearsal, we went to the parish hall for the rehearsal dinner. Vivian had done the place cards herself, in her own calligraphy, on heavy ivory cardstock with a gold edge. I sat down at my place. The card said, in Vivian's careful italic script, Ren, not Ren, Ren. She had left off the W. I looked at it. I picked it up. I turned it over to make sure I was reading it right. I was reading it right. I looked across the table at Reed. Reed was talking to his cousin about a fishing trip. I looked at Vivian. Vivian was pouring iced tea for Leonard and smiling at the priest. I set the card back down. I told myself it was a typo. I told myself she had done 40 of these by hand, and one of them had a missing letter, and it happened to be mine, and it did not mean anything. I told myself I was being sensitive. I picked up my fork. I ate my salad. I let it slide. Warning sign number 4. 21 hours from the wedding, I let it slide. Ruth saw the card. Ruth had flown up from Charleston that afternoon. Ruth was sitting 2 seats down from me on the bride's side of the table. Ruth has cataracts in her left eye and arthritis in both hands, and she does not miss anything. She leaned over to her seatmate, a cousin of mine named Cora, and she said, just loud enough for me to hear, Cora, sweetheart, hand me that card. I want to see something. Cora handed her the card. Ruth read it. Ruth looked at me. Ruth said nothing. Ruth slid the card into her handbag. Ruth picked up her wineglass and took a sip and looked across the table at Vivian the way a hawk looks at a field mouse it has decided to take its time with. I did not understand at that moment that Ruth had just become my second. In old duels, the second was the person you brought to make sure things were done honorably. Ruth, at 81 with a hatbox and a Charleston accent thick enough to spread on a biscuit, had just appointed herself mine. She did not tell me until later. She did not need to. She had taken the card. The morning of the wedding, I woke up at 6:15, which is what I do every Saturday because my body does not understand weekends. I made coffee. I sat on the back porch of the bed and breakfast on Salisbury Street, where my bridesmaids and I had stayed the night, and I watched the sun come up over the hardware store across the alley. I called my mother. I told her I loved her. I told her I would see her at the church at 2. I went back inside. I drank a second cup of coffee. I did my own makeup, because I have always done my own makeup, and I was not going to start letting strangers near my face on the most photographed day of my life. The hairstylist arrived at 10. The photographer arrived at 11. The bridesmaids arrived at 11:30. By 1 in the afternoon, I was in my dress, and one of my bridesmaids, a friend of mine from graduate school named Petra, was holding a steamer to the train and humming the Carolina fight song under her breath to keep from crying. We drove to the church in two separate cars. I was in the second car with my father, who did not say a word the entire 7-minute drive, because my father is a band director and he saves his words for after the music. I was grateful for the silence. I needed it. We arrived at the church at 2:20. Bedit, the wedding coordinator, met us at the side door. She had a stack of programs in her hand, freshly delivered from the printer that morning. She handed one to my father. She handed one to me. She said, "These just got here. They're gorgeous. Vivienne approved them last night." She walked off to tell the string quartet they had 10 minutes. I opened the program. I read it standing in the side hallway of First Methodist Church, in my wedding dress, holding a bouquet that smelled like the ranunculus my mother-in-law had not picked out, with my father standing 6 inches away from me and the sound of guests filing in through the front doors. I read my name was not on it. I read that under the union of, there was only one name, Reed's name. Beneath it, the parents of the groom. Beneath that, the order of service. The program had been printed without me, as if Reed were getting married to the institution of marriage itself, with no specific second party required. I did not cry. I want to be very clear about that, because I have replayed this moment 1,000 times and I have asked myself why I did not cry, and the answer is that my body had gone somewhere else. My hands were holding the program, my eyes were on the program. But the rest of me had walked out of my own body and was standing about 4 feet to the left, watching myself, and I could hear my own voice in my head saying very calmly, the way I would say it to a client across a conference table, "This is not an accident. This was approved, this was designed." My father looked at me. He looked at the program in my hand. He read it. He did not say anything for about 10 seconds. Then he said quietly, "Ren, honey, do you want me to go get her?" By her, he meant Vivienne. My father, who has not raised his voice in 31 years of teaching teenagers how to play the trombone, was offering to go find my mother-in-law in the bridal parlor and have a conversation with her, and I knew, the way you know certain things about your own father, that if I said yes, he would do it, and the wedding would not happen. I could have said yes. I could have stopped the entire thing right there in the side hallway, sent everyone home, and we could have figured out what we were going to do about the deposit on the caterer in the morning. I did not. I am going to tell you why, because this is the I could have, but I didn't moment, and it is the moment that, looking back, I am the proudest of, even though at the time it felt like cowardice. I shook my head. I said, "Daddy, no. Not now. Not here. If we do this now, she wins." My father looked at me for a long beat. He nodded once. He said, "Then we walk." He took my arm. The string quartet started the processional. The doors of the sanctuary opened. We walked. I want you to hold that image in your mind. A 34-year-old woman walking down the aisle of a Methodist church on her father's arm, holding a bouquet of white ranunculus, in an ivory satin dress with a hand-stitched seam down the back, knowing that the program being handed to every single one of the 240 people watching her does not contain her name. Knowing that the woman who orchestrated it is sitting in the front pew on the groom's side wearing a dove gray suit and a pearl brooch shaped like a magnolia. Knowing that man waiting for her at the altar either knew and said nothing or did not know, and either answer is going to be a problem. I walked, I smiled, I reached the altar. My father kissed my cheek. He placed my hand in Reed's hand. He looked Reed in the eye for 1 second longer than was necessary, and then he sat down beside my mother in the second pew on the bride's side. The ceremony began. I do not remember the readings. I remember the smell of the candles. I remember the way the light came through the stained glass window above the choir loft, blue and gold and a strip of red, falling across the back of Reed's neck. I remember that Reed's hand was sweating, and I remember thinking with a calmness that frightened me, he knows. He knows about the program. He is sweating because he knows. I do not have proof of that. I have never asked him directly. I have my own knowing, and that has had to be enough. The vows happened. The rings happened. The kiss happened. We turned to face the congregation. And then, in the part of the ceremony where the best man traditionally introduces the new couple and reads any acknowledgments from the program, the best man, whose name was Silas, and who had been a friend of Reed's since the second grade, stepped up to the microphone. He looked down at the program. He looked at Vivienne. He looked at me. He cleared his throat. What he did then, the folding of the program, the small wooden table, the line about adding a name they forgot. I have already told you. You know how that part ends. What I want to tell you now is what happened in the 30 seconds after he said my name into the microphone. Because in those 30 seconds, 4 things happened, and I noticed all of them, the way you notice every brick in a building when the building is on fire. The first thing that happened was that Vivienne's right hand, which had been resting on Leonard's knee, closed. It closed the way a fist closes, slowly, deliberately, the knuckles going white against the gray silk of her skirt. She did not move her face. She did not look at me. Her hand closed. That was the first thing. The second thing that happened was that Reed, my husband of approximately 90 seconds, exhaled. Not a sigh. A small, controlled breath, like a man who has been holding it for an hour. And then he said into the side of my neck, so quietly I almost did not hear him, "I'm so sorry." 3 words, "I'm so sorry." He did not say what he was sorry for. He did not need to. I felt in that moment the entire architecture of the next 6 months of our marriage assemble itself, brick by brick, in my chest. He had known, not all of it, not the erasure, but he had known something, and he had said nothing. The third thing that happened was that Glenn, the brother-in-law, the one who had told me 8 weeks earlier that the quiet ones keep the receipts, stood up from his seat in the third row. He did not say anything. He just stood. He stood for the bride. And then, one by one, in a way that was so quiet you might have missed it if you were not looking, the rest of my husband's side of the family followed. Not Vivienne, not Leonard, the cousins, the uncles, Glenn's wife. They stood for me. And in standing, they told Vivienne, without saying a single word, that she had finally pushed too far, and they were not coming with her this time. The fourth thing that happened was that Ruth, my 81-year-old great-aunt from Charleston, reached into her handbag, pulled out the place card from the rehearsal dinner, the one that said Wren, and held it up. Just held it up, from the fourth row, like a small ivory verdict. I am told, by a cousin who was sitting beside her, that Ruth did not say a word during the entire ceremony, that she just sat there holding that card in her hand the way other women held programs. And that at the reception, 3 hours later, she walked up to Vivienne at the cake table, set the card down on a napkin between them, and said, "Vivienne, sweetheart, you got the W. Bless your heart, you must have been so tired." That is, by the way, the most violent sentence ever spoken by an 81-year-old Methodist woman in the history of the American South. If you have never lived below the Mason-Dixon, you may need to hear this twice. "Bless your heart, you must have been so tired" is not a kindness. It is a declaration of war, delivered in a pearl earring. The reception was a fog. I will not bore you with the details. I will tell you that I ate 3 bites of the cake, that I danced with my father to a song he picked out, which was "What a Wonderful World," and that halfway through that dance, I looked over my father's shoulder and I saw Vivienne standing alone by the bar. Not at the bar, beside the bar, holding a glass of white wine she was not drinking. She looked, for the first time since I had known her, small, not defeated. Vivienne does not do defeated, but small. The way a building looks when the scaffolding comes down and you realize it was the scaffolding, making it look bigger than it was the whole time. That night, in the bridal suite at the bed and breakfast on Salisbury Street, after Reed had fallen asleep, I sat on the edge of the bathtub in my hotel robe and I opened my laptop and I logged into the folder labeled Holloway and Sons, Audit Trail. I read every document, all 412. I read them for 3 hours. By the time I closed the laptop, at 2 in the morning, on the first night of my marriage, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I did not know yet when I was going to do it, but I knew what. What I knew was this. 3 years earlier, when Vivienne and Leonard's antique store had been about to fold, when First Carolina Bank had refused to extend the line of credit, when Leonard had sat at my dining room table on a Sunday in March and put his face in his hands and said, "Honey, I don't know what we're going to do," I had not just helped them with their books. I had done something I had never told either of them. I had created a small holding company in the state of Delaware under a name they would not recognize, and through that holding company, I had purchased the second mortgage on their house from First Carolina Bank at a discount because the bank had been trying to get rid of it for 18 months. I had done it because if the antique store went under, the bank was going to come for the house, and the house had been in Leonard's family since 1948. I had done it because I had loved Leonard, and because I had still, at that point, loved the woman who had sewn the lining back into my grandmother's coat. I had done it as a gift. I had never planned to use it. I had never planned to tell them. I owned the second mortgage on Vivienne and Leonard's house, $286,000. Payments came monthly to a P.O. box in Wilmington, Delaware. They had been paying me for 3 years, and they did not know they had been paying me. I had been, very quietly, the only thing standing between them and foreclosure for 36 straight months, and the woman holding that note had just been erased from her own wedding program. The honeymoon was in Charleston because Reed had wanted somewhere we could drive to. We went for 5 days. I will not lie to you and tell you it was easy. It was not. There is a particular silence that exists between two people who have just gotten married and are both pretending that something did not happen. On the second night, in a restaurant on East Bay Street, over a plate of shrimp and grits I could not eat, I asked Reed the question I had not been able to ask in the bridal suite. I said, "Did you know?" He put down his fork. He looked at his water glass. He said, "I knew the place cards were wrong. At the rehearsal, I saw your name. I asked her about it. She told me it was a printer error and she'd fix it for the program. I believed her. I should not have believed her. I am so sorry." I did not say anything for a long time. I let him sit in it. I let him sit in it the way Vivienne had let me sit at table 11 and at the bridal shower and on every Sunday afternoon for 3 years. And then I said, very quietly, "Raid, if she does this at the wedding, she is going to do worse. We have not seen the worst of it yet." He said, "I'll talk to her." I said, "No, you won't. You'll mean to. You'll plan to. You'll rehearse it in the car. And then you'll get to her kitchen and she'll hand you a piece of pound cake and you'll forget every word of it. That is not a criticism. That is a diagnosis. I have watched you do it for 2 years." He did not argue with me. That was the moment I knew the marriage was either going to make it, because he could hear that sentence without defending himself, or it was going to end, because hearing it without defending himself was not the same as doing anything about it. We will get to which one it was. I am not ready yet. The first 3 months of the marriage were a slow, polite kind of war. Vivienne, in the week after the wedding, did exactly what I knew she would do, which was nothing. No apology, no acknowledgement. She sent a thank you note for the gifts she had received as the mother of the groom on her own monogrammed stationery, and she did not mention the program. She invited Reed to Sunday dinner. She did not invite me. The first time, Reed went without me. He came home at 9 that night, sat down on the edge of our bed, and told me, with a face that looked like a man who had just realized he was 40 pounds heavier than he thought he was. My mother spent the entire dinner talking about how lucky I am that I have a partner who is so understanding. He did not go again. From the second Sunday on, when Vivienne called, Reed said evenly, "If Ren isn't invited, I'm not coming." Vivienne, after the third refusal, started inviting me. She did not address the program. She did not address anything. She set a place at the table for me, with my full name on the place card, in her careful italic script, with the W intact, and she behaved as if nothing had ever happened. That was her move. That was always her move. The Southern erasure is not what she did at the wedding. The Southern erasure is the pretending that what she did at the wedding had not happened. I went. I went 4 Sundays in a row. I ate her pot roast and her green beans and her pecan pie. I let her correct my pronunciation of pecan one last time, and I did not flinch. I was studying her. She did not realize I was studying her, because she had spent 2 years assuming I could not be studying her, because I was the quiet one, and the quiet one was the one being studied, not the one doing the studying. She had it backwards. Yeah, she had always had it backwards. What's what I was studying in those 4 Sundays was 3 things. I was studying who in that family was loyal to her and who was loyal to the truth. I was studying the books of the antique store, which I had quietly stopped touching the week of the wedding, to see what would start to go wrong without me. And I was studying my own husband, to find out which kind of man I had actually married. By the end of the 4th Sunday, I had answers to all 3. The first answer was that Glenn, the brother-in-law, the one who had stood up at the altar, was not loyal to his mother. He was loyal to a version of his mother he no longer believed in, and he had been waiting, possibly for years, for an excuse to stop pretending. The night of the third Sunday dinner, Glenn walked me to my car. He stood in the driveway with his hands in his pockets in a January wind that was sharp enough to make my eyes water, and he said, "Wren, I owe you an apology." I said, "For what?" He said, "For not telling you what she was before the wedding." I knew. I have always known. She did it to my wife too. Different version, same woman. I told myself it wasn't my place to warn you, because I didn't want to be the brother who poisoned his own family. I should have warned you. I'm sorry. I looked at him. Glenn, who had asked me at Easter whether I had considered staying home because accounting was hard on a woman's nerves. Glenn, who had called my cooking a hobby. Glenn, who in his own way had been raised by the same woman and had been broken by her in different places. I said, "Glenn, why are you telling me this now?" He said, "Because she's about to make a move on the store. And when she does, I want to be on the right side of it." That was the answer to the second thing. The store was not going to be okay without me. I had known it would not be. I had built the systems carefully, but I had built them on a foundation that depended on someone reconciling the accounts every other Sunday and watching the line of credit and keeping the vendors from going to collections. Without me doing that, in the first 10 weeks of my absence, the store had quietly started bleeding again. Leonard's health was not what it had been. Vivienne had taken over the books. Vivienne, who, in addition to being a Methodist church pillar and a calligrapher and the woman who had once sewn a coat lining back into a dead woman's coat, was, it turned out, exactly the kind of bookkeeper who you would expect a woman who had raised her daughter-in-law from a wedding program to be. Sloppy, defensive, convinced she did not need help. She was making mistakes. Glenn, who worked Florence on Saturdays, could see them, and he was not stupid enough to think he could fix them himself. He said, in the driveway, "She's going to come to you. She's going to ask you to come back. And she's going to do it in a way where she pretends she's doing you a favor. I want you to know, ahead of time, that whatever you decide to do, I'm on your side." I said, "Glenn, what does she think she has on me?" He said, "She thinks you're scared of her. She thinks you'll come back to the store because you can't stand to see Daddy stressed. She thinks you're soft." I said, "She thinks I'm soft." He said, "Yeah, she does." I did not say anything for a long time. Glenn waited. Glenn, who had grown up in that woman's house, knew how to wait. Eventually, I said, "Glenn, I need to tell you something. And I need you to not tell anyone, not even your wife, not yet." He said, "Okay. I own the second mortgage on your parents' house. I bought it 3 years ago. They've been paying me for 36 months, and they do not know it." Glenn looked at me for about 5 seconds. He did not blink. Then he started to laugh. Not a cruel laugh. A long, quiet, exhausted laugh. The kind of laugh a man laughs when something he has suspected for years has just been confirmed. He said, "Wren, sweet Jesus, Mama better watch out for you." I said, "Glenn, I am not going to use it against them. Unless she forces me to." He said, "She's going to force you to." He was right. He was right within 9 days. The third answer, the one about my husband, was the hardest to write down. Reed, in those 4 Sundays, did something I had not expected. He did not just refuse to defend his mother. He started to see her, really see her. For the first time in his 36 years on this planet, Reed had been raised by Vivienne to believe that her opinions were facts and that her approval was love. And in those 4 Sundays, sitting across from her at her own dining room table, watching her treat his wife with surgical politeness, he started to understand that the person his mother had taught him to be was not a person he wanted to be anymore. He did not say this to me in a speech. He said it in small ways. He started cutting her off when she made certain comments. He started reaching for my hand at the table when she made others. On the 4th Sunday, he interrupted her in the middle of a story she was telling about my dress for the wedding, the dress I had paid for myself, and he said, "Mama, that's enough." 2 words. That's enough. Vivienne went silent. Leonard looked at his plate. I watched my husband become, in real time, a person I had not yet met but had been waiting 12 years for. That was the 2nd week of February. By the 3rd week of February, Vivienne made her move. She called me on a Thursday afternoon, not Reed. Me. I was at my office. She had gotten the number from Reed again, because she had not learned. She said, in the voice she used for the garden club, "Wren, honey, I was hoping we could have a little chat about the store. Daddy's been so worried. I was thinking, since you have such a gift for these things, maybe you could come by on Sunday and just look over the books. Just like old times, just like old times." 3 months after, she erased me from my own wedding program. Just like old times, I said, Vivienne, I'd love to help, but this time I think we should put something in writing. There was a pause. Vivienne, on the other end of the line, did not understand what I had just said. She was used to me saying yes. She was used to me saying it for free, on a Sunday, on my own time, on my own dime. She was used to dabbling in finance. She said, in writing. Honey, what do you mean? I said, I mean a consulting agreement. I've thought a lot about this since the wedding, and I think the way we did things before was not healthy for any of us. If I'm going to come back and help with the store, I'd like to do it professionally. I'll send you a draft. We can talk through it on Sunday, she said. Ren, we're family. I said, Vivienne. That's exactly why I want it in writing. I hung up the phone. I sat in my office for about 10 minutes, and I looked out the window at the parking lot. I had just said the most important sentence of my marriage, and I had said it the way I asked clients to clarify their assets. Quietly, cleanly, without raising my voice. The quiet ones keep the receipts. Glenn had been right. I had just told her, in a single sentence, that the woman she thought she was negotiating with did not exist anymore. I drove home that night and told Reed everything: the mortgage, the holding company, the Delaware filings, the 36 months of payments, the folder of 412 documents on my home computer. I told him because if I was about to do what I thought I was about to do, he had a right to know first. I sat him down on the couch in our living room, and I told him, and I watched his face go through, in real time, every stage of understanding what kind of woman he had actually married. When I was done, he said, Ren. I said, yeah. He said, how long were you going to wait to tell me this? I said, until she made me do it. I had hoped it would be never. I had hoped, for 3 years, that I would die at 95 with that file unopened, and your parents in their house, and nobody ever knowing. I am telling you tonight because I think she is about to make me open it. He said, okay. I said, okay. He said, what do you need from me? I said, I need you to not call your mother. I need you to not warn her. I need you to trust me to handle it, and I need you when it is over to still be sitting on this couch. He said, Ren, I am not going anywhere. I believed him. I had a reason to believe him now. I did not believe him the way I had believed the paper cup of coffee. I believed him the way you believe a man who has interrupted his mother in her own dining room. I believed him because, for the first time in 12 years, he had earned it. That night I lay in bed and I cried. I have to tell you this because I need you to understand that the calm I am describing was not numbness. It was decision. Underneath the decision, there was a 34-year-old woman who was about to do a thing that was going to permanently change her relationship with her in-laws, and who, despite everything, despite the rehearsal dinner and the program and the wedding and the Sundays, still wanted, somewhere in the bottom of her chest, for her mother-in-law to come into the bedroom with a sewing basket the size of a microwave and sit down on the floor and sew her grandmother's coat lining back in. That woman did not exist anymore. She possibly had never existed. The fact that I had to grieve a woman who possibly had never existed was, I will tell you, honestly, the worst part of all of it. I lay in the dark and I grieved the woman who had sewn the lining back in. And then, around 3 in the morning, I got up, I went to the kitchen, I drank a glass of water, and I went back to bed, and I did not cry again. There was a valley moment in there, and I want to name it because if you are listening to this and you are about to do a hard thing, you are going to have one too, and you need to know it does not mean you are wrong. The valley moment for me came 2 days later on a Saturday morning when I drove past the antique store on Sunset Avenue on my way to the grocery. I had not planned to drive past it. I had taken a different route by accident. I slowed down. The Christmas lights were still up in the window, even though it was the 3rd week of February, because Leonard always left them up too long. The open sign was tilted at the angle it always tilted at, because the hook on the back of the door was loose, because I had been the one who had been planning to fix it before the wedding, and I had not gotten around to it. There was an old chair in the window, a sage green wingback I had helped Leonard price the previous summer, and it had not sold yet. And looking at it through the window, I felt, very suddenly and very completely, that I could turn the car around. I could call Vivienne. I could tell her I was sorry. I could go back to Sundays and dabbling in pecan and table 11, and I could keep my mouth shut and my W on the place card. And the store would survive, and Leonard would not have to be stressed. and Reed's family would not split, and I could be the woman who held it all together with her quiet, unpaid, unending competence. I sat at that stoplight for about 30 seconds. I thought about turning around. I really did. I did not turn around. What I did instead was the smallest, quietest, most internal thing. I took a breath. I said out loud in my car on Sunset Avenue in front of a Bojangles and a tire shop, I said, "No, I am not the scaffolding, I am the building." And I drove to the grocery. That sentence is the sentence I want you to write down if you write down nothing else from this entire story. I am not the scaffolding, I am the building. Vivian had spent 3 years making me believe I was the scaffolding, the thing you put up around the building to make the building look bigger than it was, and then quietly took down so the building could be photographed alone. I was not the scaffolding. I had been the building the whole time, and the building was the only reason the scaffolding had ever looked like anything at all. On Sunday afternoon, I drove to the in-laws' house. I had the consulting agreement in a manila folder on the passenger seat. I had not told Vivian about the mortgage. I did not plan to that day. I had not told Leonard. I did not plan to that day either. The agreement was simple, 8 pages. Fee structure, scope of work, termination clauses, confidentiality, ownership of work product. It was the cleanest document I had ever drafted, and I had drafted hundreds. I had drafted it the way you draft a peace treaty, when you know the other side is going to read it and decide whether to sign it or start a war. I sat at the dining room table. Vivienne brought out a coffee service. Leonard sat across from me, looking tired, looking grateful, looking like a man who did not understand why his wife had not just thanked me 3 years earlier and avoided all of this. I slid the agreement across the table. I said, "Take your time." Vivian picked it up. She read the first page. She read the second page. She got to the section about fees, which were market rate, not high, not low, just real, and her mouth tightened. She set the agreement down. She said, "Ren, honey, we can't afford this." I said, "Vivienne, yes, you can." She said, "We've been struggling. Daddy and I have been so worried." I said, "I know you have. That's why you need a real consultant and not a daughter-in-law who is doing it on the side." She said, "I think we'd prefer to keep it the way it was." I said, "I understand. I'm not available the way it was. I'm available this way, or I'm not available." There was a long silence. Leonard looked at Vivienne. Vivienne looked at the agreement. She looked at me. She did not look angry. She looked, for the first time, frightened. Vivienne was frightened. The pillar of the Methodist Women's Auxiliary, the calligrapher of the place cards, the woman who had erased my name from the program, was frightened because she had just understood that the woman across from her at the dining room table was not the same woman who had eaten the pot roast for 4 Sundays in a row. She said, "Ren, if we can't agree, I don't know what we'll do." I said, "Vivienne, I do. You'll hire someone else. You'll pay them what they're worth. And you and I will go back to being family in the ways family is, and we will not mix it up with money anymore. That is a healthy thing. That is what I want for us." She said, "I'll have to think about it." I said, "Of course." I picked up my coffee cup. I took a sip. I did not say anything else. Leonard cleared his throat. He said, "Viv, it's fair. The girl has been doing it for free for 3 years. It's fair." Vivienne did not answer him. She looked at me. She said, "Ren, why are you doing this now?" And here is the thing about Vivienne. Here is the human crack in her. Because in that moment when she asked me why I was doing this now, she was not asking why I was charging for my services. She was asking why I was no longer pretending. She was asking why I had stopped being the scaffolding. She was asking, in the only language a woman like Vivienne had, whether the program at the wedding was the reason. She did not have the vocabulary to apologize. She had the vocabulary to ask indirectly whether I was going to make her pay for it. I looked at her. I had a choice. I could have said, "Because you erased me from my own wedding program, Vivienne." I could have said it, and it would have been true, and it would have ended us. I did not say it. I will tell you why. Because I did not want to give her the satisfaction of being the villain of my story to my own face. Villains want the confrontation. Villains want the moment where you scream at them so they can tell their friends about how unhinged you were. I was not going to give her that. I said instead, "Because I am 34 years old, Vivienne, and I have spent the last 3 years being very useful to people who did not see me. I am not interested in being useful in that way anymore. That is all. There is no other reason." She nodded. She did not cry. Vivian does not cry in front of other people. She nodded once. She said, I see. I left the agreement on the table. I drove home. I did not look back. 3 days later, Vivian hired a CPA from Greensboro. He was 36, charged twice what I had been planning to charge, and within 6 weeks, he had told her in writing that the store was insolvent on a forward basis, and that something had to change. She did not tell Leonard. She tried to handle it herself. She missed a payment to the furniture vendor in High Point. The vendor, who had been burned before, did not give her a second warning. He filed a lien on the inventory. The lien went public. The Asheboro Courier-Tribune, which has a small but devoted business section, ran a paragraph in its weekly business update. Holloway and Sons, the antique store on Sunset Avenue, and an Asheboro institution since 1948, has had a vendor lien filed against its inventory by Carolina Hardwood Wholesale of High Point in the amount of $34,612. 12 sentences in the local paper. In Asheboro, which is a town of 26,000 people, 12 sentences in the local paper is a billboard. The garden club called Vivienne, not officially. The chair of the garden club called Vivienne on a Tuesday morning and said gently that she had been thinking, and perhaps it was time for Vivienne to step back from the events committee just for a season, just to take some pressure off. Vivienne understood what that meant. The Methodist Women's Auxiliary, which had been planning the spring tea, called and said they had decided to go a different direction this year. Vivienne understood what that meant too. A woman she had known since 1979, a woman named Lorraine, the same Lorraine who had been at the Memorial Day cookout, where Vivienne had called me a girl who dabbled in finance, ran into her at the Harris Teeter on a Wednesday afternoon and pretended not to see her. That was the social consequence. It was specific, it was local, it was in Asheboro terms, total. The day after the lien hit the paper, Glenn called me. He said, "She's going to come to you again. Be ready." She came to me again, not at my office this time, at my house. On a Saturday morning at 10:15 in a navy raincoat, with her purse held in both hands like a shield. Reed was not home. I had asked him to take a long drive that morning. I had known she was coming. Glenn had told me the night before. I let her in. I gave her a cup of coffee. She sat on the edge of the couch in my living room. She did not take off her coat. She said, "Ren, I need your help." She said, "I don't know how to ask you." I said, "Vivienne, before you ask, I need to tell you something." She looked up. I said, "I own the second mortgage on your house. I bought it 3 years ago from First Carolina when they were going to foreclose. I have owned it ever since. You have been making your payments on time to a holding company in Delaware that belongs to me. Leonard does not know. I have never told him. I did it because I loved you. I did it because of the coat. I am telling you now in this room because if I am going to help you save the store, you and I are going to do it as equals, and equals do not have secrets from each other." She stared at me. The coffee cup in her hand began very slowly to shake. She set it down on the side table. She said, "Ren," I said, "I know." She said, "Why did you not?" I said, "Because I was not going to use it against you. I am not going to use it against you now. I am telling you, on the record in your son's house, that the note is yours to pay back on the same terms you have been paying it. Nothing changes. I am not asking for anything. I am telling you so that we can stop pretending about anything, about the wedding, about the program, about the 3 years, about all of it." She put her hand over her mouth. She did not cry. Vivienne does not cry. She closed her eyes. She sat on my couch in her navy raincoat, with her purse in her lap and her hand over her mouth, and she did not say a word for what felt like a very long time. When she opened her eyes, she said, "Ren, I am so sorry about the program." That was the apology. 8 words. "Ren, I am so sorry about the program." It was not a full apology. It did not address the 3 years. It did not address the place card. It did not address table 11. It did not address the bridal shower, or the dabbling comment, or the Sundays I had not been invited to, or the way she had introduced my husband as her son to 100 different people at the reception, and had introduced me as Reed's wife, never by name, never once. The apology covered the program. Just the program. It was, in Vivian terms, an enormous apology. It was the most she had ever apologized to anyone for anything in her life. I knew that because Glenn had told me, when we stood in the driveway in January, that he had been waiting his entire adult life for his mother to apologize for anything, and she never had, not once, not to anyone. I accepted it. I said, Vivienne, thank you. I am going to help you save the store. We are going to sign the consulting agreement. You are going to pay me. I am going to come every other Sunday for the next 12 months, and we are going to clean up this mess. After 12 months, we are going to talk about whether we keep doing it. And the program and everything else. We are going to talk about overtime. Not today. Today we are going to talk about the lien. She said, okay. I said, okay. She picked up her coffee. Her hand was steadier. She drank. She said, Ren, may I ask you one thing? I said, yes. She said, how long had you known that I was the way I was? I said, since the rehearsal dinner. Since the place card. She said, and you walked anyway. I said, I walked anyway. She said, why? I said, because Reed was at the end of the aisle. And because the woman who sewed my grandmother's coat back together was, I thought, still in there somewhere. She looked at me. She did not say anything for a long moment. She said, Ren, she is not as far away as you think. That was the closest Vivienne and I have ever come to a real conversation. It was not a reconciliation. It was not a friendship. It was a treaty signed quietly between two women who had decided that the war was too expensive to keep funding. We have not in the 2 years since become close. We are not going to. There is too much under the bridge, and I have stopped expecting bridges to be unconditional. But we are civil, we are real. She has called me by my full name in front of other people every single time I have seen her. Since that Saturday on my couch, she has never apologized for anything else. I have stopped expecting her to. The program apology in its 8-word version is the only one I am going to get, and after a great deal of thought, I have decided that it is enough. Not because it is enough by any normal measure, but because it is the most she could give, and I no longer require people to give me more than they have in order to be in my life. That is a sentence I learned to say at 34. I wish I had learned it at 24. The store survived. It is not what it was. We sold the warehouse property in 2024 and downsized to just the front showroom. Leonard retired, which he should have done in 2019, and he and Vivienne now spend 3 afternoons a week at the store and the rest of the time at home. The store, on a trailing 12-month basis as of last quarter, is modestly profitable for the first time in 11 years. I am paid for my work. The consulting agreement joined for a second year and a third. Glenn runs the day-to-day. Glenn and I, against everyone's expectations, including our own, have become friends. He told me last Thanksgiving that I am the closest thing he has to a sister, and his wife, whose name is Bea, hugged me in the kitchen and did not let go for a long time. Bea, by the way, is a saint, and I had not understood that about her for the first 3 years, because I had been too busy being looked at sideways by Vivienne to notice that the woman married to Glenn had been keeping her own quiet receipts. We talk now, we talk a lot. The mortgage I still own, I have not transferred it, I have not foreclosed on it. The payments come every month. They will keep coming for another 11 years on the amortization schedule. By the time it is paid off, I will be 45 and Vivienne will be 78 and Leonard will be 81. I do not know if she has told Leonard. I have not asked. I suspect she has not. I suspect she will not. That is between them. It is not my marriage, Reed. My husband, the man who said, on his honeymoon, in a restaurant on East Bay Street in Charleston, that he was not going anywhere. Reed is still here. He is sitting in the other room as I am recording this. He is reading a book about, of all things, beekeeping, which is a hobby he picked up last spring, and which I think he picked up because his hands needed something to do that was not waiting for his mother's approval. He is, by every measure that matters, a different man than the one I married. Not because I changed him. Because he changed himself and I happened to be the person standing next to him while he did it. That is, I think, the only kind of change that ever lasts in a marriage. You cannot change a person. You can only be present while they decide to change themselves. And you can decide, the entire time, whether what they are becoming is something you can love. I decided slowly and on purpose that what Reed was becoming was something I could love. I do not regret it. Some days I am still nervous. That is fair. That is human. I have stopped expecting marriages or mothers-in-law or anything else to be free of nerves. I want to tell you one last thing. About Ruth. About the place card. About the W. Ruth flew back down to Charleston the day after the wedding. She lived another 19 months. She passed in May in her own bed, with a great-grandniece holding her hand and a copy of the Charleston Post and Courier folded on the nightstand. At her funeral, in a small Episcopal church on Trad Street, her granddaughter handed me an envelope. Inside the envelope was the place card, the one from the rehearsal dinner, the one that said Wren. Ruth had kept it for 19 months. There was a note clipped to it in Ruth's spidery handwriting. The note said, Wren, you put the W back yourself. That is what we do. Love, Ruth. I framed the place card. It hangs in the hallway of my house, next to a photograph of my grandmother in the camel coat with the silk lining intact. It is the first thing you see when you walk through my front door. People ask about it. I tell them it is a long story and that they should sit down, and that I will get them a glass of something. If you have made it this far, I want to ask you something and I want you to think about it before you answer. Because the question is that I had to answer for myself. And I think it is the question underneath every story like this one. The people who erase you, the mothers, the in-laws, the bosses, the friends, the ones who leave the W off the place card and the name off the program. What do you owe them, in the end, after the fact, once you have survived them? Do you owe them silence? Do you owe them the confrontation they would prefer? Do you owe them the apology they will never ask for? Do you owe them the version of yourself that they tried to erase, served back to them on a porcelain plate, with their name on it in calligraphy? Or do you owe them nothing at all, except the simple, quiet fact of your own continued existence, with your full name on the front door and the W exactly where you put it back yourself? I have my answer. I would like to know yours.